The lumina chamber of the Cathar ascendancy pulsed with the soft, internal light of a dying star, a fitting ambience for the gravity of the conclave. Polished obsidian floors reflected the vaulted, crystalline ceiling where constellations of captured nebulae swirled in silent, majestic turmoil. At the heart of this cavernous space, arranged in a descending spiral of floating platforms, sat the arbiters of the concordance, their varied forms shrouded in robes of state, their faces masks of ancient tradition and profound disquiet. The air was thick with the scent of ozonic filters and the unspoken anxieties of a dozen starfaring civilizations. At the lowest point of the spiral, on a stark, unadorned dais, stood two figures, small and trembling. They were Xyler and Kalen, brothers, the last of their kind. Their downy, silver-blue fur was matted with the dust of their ruined homeworld, their large, liquid-dark eyes wide with a terror that transcended language. They were orphans of a war that had been a footnote in the grand, uncaring history of the galaxy, their planet a casualty of a territorial dispute between two lumbering, indifferent empires. Now their existence was a political inconvenience, a loose thread in the meticulously woven tapestry of galactic diplomacy. The debate had raged for what felt like an eternity to the young ones. Voices, deep and resonant or sharp and sibilant, echoed in the chamber. They spoke of precedent, of resource allocation, of the delicate balance of power that would be disrupted by the unprecedented act of adopting the last scions of a dead race. The Cathar, whose chamber this was, argued for their placement in a preservation sanctuary, a living museum where their culture could be studied and mourned. The mechanoid synod of Cygnus X1 proposed their consciousnesses be uploaded to the archival gestalt, to live forever as data, their biological forms deemed inefficient and prone to decay. The arguments were cold, logical, detached. They spoke of the brothers as if they were artifacts, not beings. Xyler, the elder, pulled his younger brother closer, shielding him with his own small body from the crushing weight of the words that decided their fate. He could feel Kalen's heart thrumming against his ribs like a trapped bird. Then a new voice cut through the cacophony. It was different. It lacked the melodic cadence of the avian xiphons, the grating undertones of the insectoid thrax, the synthesized perfection of the synod. It was flat, uninflected, yet it carried an authority that silenced the chamber. It came from a figure who had remained silent until now, standing in the shadows of one of the higher platforms, a representative who was in itself a source of endless debate and unease. A human. He was a bipedal creature of stark simplicity compared to the ornate beings around him. Clad in a dark, unadorned uniform of a material that seemed to drink the light, he stood with a stillness that was unnerving. His face was a landscape of hard lines and subtle expressions that the other species found impossible to read. His eyes, a pale, piercing blue, seemed to see through the grand theatrics of the conclave to the core of the matter. He was known only as Administrator Thorn. His species was a recent, disruptive addition to the galactic stage. They were builders, explorers, and warriors of terrifying efficiency. They were also disturbingly quiet, their society a closed book, their motivations an enigma. They were seen as harsh, pragmatic, and devoid of the sentimentalities that governed so many other cultures. "The human delegation will take them," Thorn's voice echoed, devoid of any discernible emotion. The statement was not a request, it was a declaration. A wave of murmurs, a cascade of whispered disbelief and outrage, rippled through the lumina chamber. The Cathar Prime, a being of immense age and wisdom whose form was a shimmering column of light, pulsed with a deep, resonant hum of disapproval. "Administrator Thorn," the Prime's voice was a chorus of harmonious chimes. "The children are not property. They are the last echoes of a song that has been silenced. Their care requires a delicate touch, an understanding of loss that your practical species may not possess." Thorn's gaze did not waver. He took a slow step forward into the light, and for the first time the assembly could see the fine lines etched around his eyes, the faint, silvery scar that cut through one eyebrow. They were marks of a life lived, of hardships endured, but to the aliens they were just further signs of his species' brutal nature. "We are aware of the delicacy of the situation, Prime," Thorn replied, his tone unchanged. "We are also aware that a gilded cage is still a cage. A digital ghost is not a life. We offer them not preservation, but a future. They will be raised as our own." The very concept was offensive to many present. The idea of these fragile, ethereal beings, products of a cult. You're that celebrated art and empathy above all else, being raised by a human, a member of a species known for its relentless expansion, its Spartan philosophies, and its brutally efficient military was grotesque. The Thrax ambassador, a towering creature of chitin and mandibles, clacked its appendages in agitation. Unacceptable. The children's unique cultural heritage would be erased. They will be turned into humans. Thorn's expression remained impassive, but his blue eyes seemed to harden to become chips of ancient ice. He looked down at the two small figures on the dais. Xyler met his gaze, his fear momentarily eclipsed by a spark of defiance. He had heard the stories of the humans. They were cold, they were unfeeling, they valued strength above all else. They discarded the weak. He and his brother were weak. They were the last broken fragments of a gentle people. What could a human possibly want with them? Heritage is dead. Thorn's voice was a cold, hard truth that cut through the chamber's heated emotions. Their world is dust. You offer them a beautiful memory. We offer them the chance to build a new one. The decision rests with them. He turned his full attention to the brothers, and for the first time his voice seemed to soften, though the change was so subtle it was almost imperceptible. You will not be prisoners. You will not be exhibits. You will be given a home. You will be taught. You will be trained. You will be made strong. Life under my care will not be easy, but you will live. You will have a purpose beyond being a monument to your own extinction. The choice is yours. Silence descended upon the Lumina chamber. A profound, heavy silence. The great powers of the galaxy, the arbiters of fate, were suddenly irrelevant. The decision had been placed in the trembling hands of two orphaned children. Xyler looked at his brother, Kalen, whose large eyes were now fixed on the human. There was no warmth in the human's gaze, no promise of comfort. There was only a stark, unyielding promise of something other than an ending. The alternatives were a slow, gentle fading into irrelevance, a living death as a curiosity. The human offered hardship. He offered a life that would be a struggle, but he offered life. Xyler remembered his father's last words, whispered in a shelter as their world tore itself apart. Survive, be strong, live for us all. Survival, strength. The human had spoken those words. Perhaps this was the only path that honored his father's dying wish. He felt Kalen's small hand clutch his. He looked down and saw in his brother's eyes not just fear, but a flicker of something else. A desperate hope. He straightened his small frame, trying to project a courage he did not feel. He looked up at the towering, silent human. We will go with you." Xyler's voice was a small, thin sound in the vast chamber, but it echoed with the weight of a choice that would reshape their destiny. The human administrator Thorn gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. He had not smiled. He had not offered a single word of comfort. He simply turned and began to ascend the platform, a silent expectation that they would follow. As Xyler and Kalen took their first hesitant steps away from the dais, away from the judgment of the galaxy, and towards the stark, uncertain future offered by the harsh, enigmatic human, a new kind of fear settled in Xyler's heart. It was not the fear of extinction. It was the fear of what they might have to become to survive. The transition from the opulent, light-filled chambers of the Cathar Ascendancy to the human vessel was a jarring assault on the senses. The ship, which Thorn simply called the Resilience, was a testament to human philosophy. There were no graceful, sweeping curves, no decorative embellishments, no ambient, harmonious lighting. The corridors were stark, utilitarian tubes of gunmetal gray, illuminated by harsh, white light strips. The air was dry, recycled, and carried the faint, sterile scent of ozone and machine oil. Everything was function over form. The silence was not the contemplative quiet of the Cathar, but a heavy, oppressive absence of sound, broken only by the distant, low hum of the ship's core and the rhythmic, metallic clang of Thorn's boots on the deck plating. He led them to their designated quarters, a small, Spartan room with two simple bunks built into the wall, a single viewport showing the stardusted void, and a small, functional fresher unit. There were no soft surfaces, no art, no comforts. It was a cell, a clean, well-lit cell, but a cell nonetheless. Thorn stood in the doorway, his large frame filling the space. You will be expected to maintain this space. You will be given work assignments. You will adhere to the ship's schedule. Meals are at regulated intervals. Your education will begin tomorrow. Questions? His tone was that of an officer addressing new recruits, not a guardian speaking. To grieving children. Kalen, who had been silent for the entire journey, finally found his voice, a small, trembling whisper. Where are the others? Thorn's expression did not change. There are no others. I am the sole occupant of this vessel. The statement hung in the sterile air, more chilling than any threat. They were alone, trapped in the cold metal heart of this massive, empty ship with this one inscrutable human. The vastness of the vessel, which had at first seemed intimidating, now felt monstrously empty, a ghost ship crewed by a single harsh specter. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced Xyler. He had made a terrible mistake. He had traded a gilded cage for an iron one. The days that followed blurred into a grueling, monotonous routine. Thorn was a demanding and relentless taskmaster. Their education was not the gentle, Socratic method of their own people, which encouraged exploration and artistic expression. It was a brutal, relentless onslaught of information. Astrophysics, xenobiology, engineering, galactic history, all delivered through data slates and interactive simulations that were unforgiving of error. There were no words of praise for a correct answer, only a silent nod to proceed to the next, more difficult problem. A wrong answer was met with a curt, incorrect. Analyze your failure, repeat. Their work assignments were equally strenuous. They were taught to run diagnostic checks on ship systems, to calibrate sensor arrays, to maintain the hydroponics bay that provided the ship's food. The work was complex and physically demanding. Their small, delicate hands, evolved for painting intricate glyphs and weaving light-spun tapestries, became calloused and stained with grease. Thorn would observe their struggles in silence, offering instruction only when they were on the verge of complete failure. He never offered a helping hand. He never offered a word of encouragement. He simply watched, his pale eyes missing nothing, his presence a constant, silent pressure. The food was as Spartan as the rest of the ship. Nutrient paste, gray and tasteless, dispensed from a machine in the small mess hall. Thorn ate the same substance, in the same silence, his focus always on a data slate. The brothers, used to a diet of sweet, sun-ripened fruits and fragrant, steamed fungi, found the paste almost impossible to swallow. But hunger was a powerful motivator. The nights were the worst. In the sterile silence of their quarters, with the cold, indifferent stars staring in through the viewport, the grief and the fear they suppressed during the day would come rushing back. Kalen would often wake from nightmares, his small body trembling, silent tears streaming down his furred cheeks. Xyler would hold him, whispering the old lullabies of their people, the melodies a painful reminder of a world that was now only a ghost in his memory. He began to hate the human. He hated his coldness, his silence, his relentless demands. He saw him as a monster, a creature of iron and ice who was systematically stripping them of their identity, turning them into pale imitations of his own harsh, unfeeling species. One cycle, during a particularly difficult lesson on stellar cartography, Kalen, frustrated and exhausted, finally broke. He threw the data slate across the room where it clattered against the metal bulkhead. "I can't do this," he cried, his voice raw with despair. "It's too hard, I want to go home." The last words were a choked sob, a cry for a place that no longer existed. Thorn, who had been observing from the far side of the study chamber, did not move. His face remained a mask of neutrality. Xyler rushed to his brother's side, expecting the human to deliver some cold, cutting remark or perhaps even a punishment. But Thorn remained silent. He simply watched as Xyler comforted his sobbing brother. After a long moment, when Kalen's sobs had subsided to quiet whimpers, Thorn finally spoke, his voice as level as ever. "Grief is a luxury we do not have, Kalen. Your home is gone. Your people are gone. You can either drown in the past or you can build a future. The universe does not care which you choose. It will move on without you. The choice, as always, is yours." He then turned and walked out of the room, leaving the shattered data slate on the floor. Xyler expected to feel a fresh wave of anger at the human's cruelty. But instead, a strange, unsettling thought took root in his mind. The human's words, though harsh, were not untrue. They were a cold, hard reflection of the reality they were living. The universe did not care. The concordants had debated their fate as if they were a logistical problem. The human, for all his coldness, had never lied to them. He had promised them a hard life. He was delivering on that promise. Was this cruelty? Or was it something else? Was he trying to break them, or was he trying to forge them into something that could not be broken? The incident marked a subtle shift in Xyler's perception. He began to observe Thorn more closely, looking for the cracks in his iron facade. He started to notice things he hadn't before. He noticed that while Thorn never praised them, he also never belittled them. He would set a task, and if they failed, he would simply reset the parameters and have them do it again and again until they succeeded. He was teaching them resilience through repetition. He noticed that the nutrient paste, while tasteless, was perfectly balanced to provide for their species' unique dietary needs, something that would have required a significant amount of research. He noticed that the ship's internal temperature and atmospheric composition were meticulously maintained at a level optimal for their physiology, not his own. One evening, Xyler was working late in the engineering bay, trying to master the complex diagnostic sequence for the ship's FTL drive. He was tired, his mind foggy, and he made a mistake, bypassing a critical safety protocol. A power conduit overloaded with a sharp crackle, spitting a shower of brilliant blue sparks. Before Xyler could even react, Thorn was there. He moved with a speed that seemed impossible for his size, shoving Xyler behind him and raising a heavy armored gauntlet to shield them both as the conduit erupted in a violent, but contained, plasma discharge. The small explosion left the air thick with the smell of burnt ozone. Xyler was trembling, his heart pounding. He had been careless, he could have been killed. Thorn lowered his arm. The gauntlet was scorched and blackened. He turned to Xyler, his face illuminated by the flickering emergency lights. Xyler braced himself for the anger, the cold disappointment, but Thorn's expression was unreadable. He simply looked at the smoking conduit, then at Xyler. "You forgot to decouple the secondary plasma injector," he said, his voice calm. "An easy mistake to make. The primary and secondary feeds are not clearly differentiated on the schematic. I will update it." He then turned his attention to the damaged conduit, his movements economical and precise as he began the repair sequence. He did not say another word about the incident. But Xyler had seen it. In the split second before the plasma discharge, in the instant Thorn had moved to shield him, he had seen something in the human's eyes. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disappointment. It was a flicker of something that looked almost like fear, not for himself, but for Xyler. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the familiar, stoic mask. But it had been there. The human was not a machine. He was not unfeeling. He simply hid it. He buried his emotions under layers of discipline and control, so thick they were almost impenetrable. Why? This question haunted Xyler. He started to see Thorn's harshness not as cruelty, but as a shield. A shield he was not only using for himself, but was also trying to teach them to build for themselves. He was teaching them to be self-reliant, to be strong, not just physically, but mentally. He was preparing them for a universe that was, as he had said, uncaring. A universe that had already taken everything from them once. A significant turning point came during a deep space survey mission. The Resilience was charting a previously unexplored nebula, a vast, chaotic cloud of incandescent gas and dark matter. It was beautiful but treacherous. Kalen, who had developed a remarkable aptitude for sensor analysis, was monitoring the long-range arrays. He had grown more confident under Thorn's tutelage, his natural curiosity honed by the human's demanding lessons. He had found a purpose in the endless streams of data, a way to bring order to the chaos. "Administrator," Kalen's voice was calm but taut with an underlying tension. "I am detecting anomalous energy readings. They are not consistent with any known natural phenomena. They appear to be artificial, and they are repeating." Thorn appeared in the sensor bay, which he called the bridge, though it was just a cramped room dominated by a massive holographic display. He stood behind Kalen, his eyes fixed on the swirling, three-dimensional representation of the nebula. "Specify," was his only command. "The signal is weak, heavily degraded," Kalen explained, his small hands flying across the control interface, isolating the signal. "But it has a clear mathematical structure. It's a prime number sequence. It's a beacon." Xyler, who had been running a systems diagnostic nearby, felt a chill run down his spine. An artificial beacon in an unexplored nebula, far from any known trade routes or civilizations. It could be a distress call, or it could be a trap. Thorn was silent for a long time, his gaze lost in the holographic depths of the nebula. The ship's engines hummed in the quiet. "The Concordance has standing orders," Xyler said, breaking the silence. "Unidentified signals in uncharted territory are to be reported and the area placed under quar. Antony until a full scientific and military task force can be assembled." It was the safe, logical, procedural response. Thorn did not look at him. He continued to stare at the signal's origin point. "The signal is degrading," he said, almost to himself. "Whatever is broadcasting it is failing." "It could be a lure," Xyler pressed. "Pirates, or something worse. The Thrax have legends of things that sleep in the dark places between the stars." "Legends are for children," Thorn said, his voice flat. But then he did something unexpected. He turned to Kalen. "Kalen, what is your analysis? What does the data tell you?" It was the first time Thorn had ever asked for their opinion, not as a test, but as a genuine inquiry. Kalen seemed to grow a little taller in his chair. He re-examined the data streams, his brow furrowed in concentration. "The energy signature is old, Administrator, very old. The decay rate suggests the power source has been active for millennia, and the signal itself, it's not a broad-spectrum broadcast. It's a tight-beam transmission, focused. It's not trying to attract attention. It's trying to reach a specific point. We just happen to have crossed its path." Thorn nodded slowly. "And the composition of the nebula?" High concentrations of heavy metals and exotic particles, Kalen replied immediately. It would provide excellent cover for a hidden installation, and it would make long-range communication difficult. A focused, tight-beam signal would be the only way to get a message out. A long silence followed. Xyler could feel the unspoken weight of the decision in the air. The safe path was to retreat to report. The concordance would dither and debate for cycles, and by the time they acted, the signal might be gone forever. The dangerous path was to investigate, to plunge into the heart of the beautiful, treacherous cloud, chasing a ghost of a signal towards an unknown fate. "We are not a concordance vessel," Thorn said at last, his voice resonating with a quiet finality. "We are not bound by their procedures. We will investigate." He turned to Xyler. "Plot a course, take us in. Low power, full sensor stealth protocols." He then looked at Kalen. "Keep that signal locked. Notify me of any deviation, any change, no matter how small." He was trusting them. He was treating them not as children, not as students, but as members of his crew. The realization struck Xyler with the force of a physical blow. The work, the lessons, the harsh discipline, it had all been for this. He hadn't been just teaching them to survive. He had been training them, forging them into something capable, something useful, something he could rely on. For the first time, Xyler didn't feel like a prisoner. He felt like a partner. He nodded, a new sense of purpose solidifying within him, and turned to the navigation console, his fingers moving with a speed and confidence he hadn't known he possessed. As the Resilience slipped silently into the swirling, multicolored veils of the nebula, a shared, unspoken understanding passed between the three of them. They were alone, yes, but they were a crew, and they were flying into the unknown together. The journey into the nebula's core was a masterclass in tension. The Resilience moved like a phantom, its hull plating shifting to mimic the background radiation, its engines running at a near-silent hum. Outside the viewport, vast, silent curtains of incandescent gas drifted past, cosmic tapestries of crimson and cobalt, occasionally lit by the flash of newborn stars. It was a place of sublime, terrifying beauty. Kalen remained glued to his sensor console, his face illuminated by the green glow of the data streams. The signal was their only guide, a faint, ghostly thread leading them deeper into the labyrinth. It fluctuated, sometimes fading to a near-imperceptible whisper, only to surge back as if the ancient power source was fighting for its last breath. Xyler at the helm navigated through dense fields of crystalline asteroids and pockets of gravimetric distortion that threatened to tear the ship apart. His training, the endless, repetitive drills that Thorn had forced upon them, now paid off. His reactions were instantaneous, his hands moving with an instinct born of muscle memory. He felt a strange sense of calm, a focused clarity he had never known before. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was a whetstone, sharpening his senses rather than dulling them. Thorn stood behind them, a silent, unmoving pillar of calm. He did not issue orders. He did not interfere. He simply observed, his presence a quiet affirmation of his trust in their abilities. After what felt like an eternity, Kalen spoke, his voice hushed with awe. "I have it, visual confirmation." On the main holographic display, a structure slowly resolved out of the swirling dust and gas. It was immense, far larger than any station or vessel Xyler had ever seen. It was not a PR product of any known architectural style. It was a complex crystalline lattice, like a snowflake forged from solidified light and shadow, its spires and buttresses catching the faint light of the surrounding nebula. It was clearly ancient, its surface pitted and scarred by millennia of micrometeorite impacts, and it was dark. No lights, no energy signatures, save for the single, fading beacon that had drawn them here. "It's a derelict," Xyler breathed. "No," Thorn said, his voice low and intense. He had stepped forward, his eyes locked on the structure. "It's not a derelict, it's a tomb." As they drew closer, the scale of the structure became truly apparent. It was a megastructure, a feat of engineering that dwarfed the grandest creations of the Concordance. And Thorn was right. There was a profound, funereal stillness about it. They scanned for life signs, for any indication of a crew or inhabitants. There was nothing, only the faint, dying pulse of the beacon calling out from the structure's heart. "I'm taking us in," Thorn announced. "Xyler, find us a docking port or a breach in the hull large enough to accommodate the ship. Kalen, begin a full-spectrum analysis of the structure's composition. I want to know what it's made of, how old it is, and what kind of technology it uses. Cross-reference with every known database. I want to know who built this." Finding an entry point was difficult. The structure was almost perfectly sealed. Finally, Xyler located a series of massive hangar bay doors, large enough to swallow their ship whole. They were closed, but one of them showed signs of stress fractures, likely from some ancient, cosmic impact. With delicate maneuvering, Xyler guided the Resilience through a jagged opening in the damaged door, into the cavernous, pitch-black interior of the hangar. The moment they were inside, the beacon died. The silence that followed was absolute, a crushing, primordial void of sound. The ship's external lights cut through the darkness, revealing a hangar bay of breathtaking size. It was filled with the silent, skeletal remains of ships, their forms alien and graceful like the bones of great silver fish. They were covered in a thick layer of space dust, undisturbed for eons. "They're all gone," Kalen whispered, "whoever they were." "Not all of them," Thorn said. He pointed to a small, isolated chamber at the far end of the hangar from which the beacon's signal had originated. A single, faint light was still visible from within. "Prepare to board. We are going to find out who sent that message." The boarding party consisted of the three of them. Thorn, clad in a sleek, dark environmental suit, his face obscured by a polarized visor, carried a compact, multi-purpose energy rifle with an ease that spoke of long familiarity. He had insisted Xyler and Kalen wear suits as well. Their own people had never worn such things, finding them crude and confining, but Xyler was now grateful for the protection. The air inside the station was thin, cold, and smelled of dust and decay. They moved through the silent corridors of the megastructure in a state of reverent awe. The architecture was breathtaking, a symphony of impossible angles and flowing, organic lines. The walls were made of a material that seemed to absorb and faintly refract the light from their suit lamps, creating an ethereal, dreamlike effect. There were no signs of battle, no signs of destruction, other than that caused by the slow, inexorable passage of time. It was as if the inhabitants had simply vanished. They followed the path to the chamber from which the beacon had emanated. It was a large, circular room, and in its center was a raised dais. Upon the dais rested a single, ornate sarcophagus, fashioned from the same crystalline material as the station itself. The faint light they had seen from the hangar came from a series of glowing glyphs that adorned its surface. The glyphs were slowly fading, one by one. Kalen approached the sarcophagus, his scientific curiosity overcoming his fear. He ran his gloved hand over the surface, his suit's sensors analyzing the glyphs. "It's a language," he murmured. "Incredibly complex, but it seems to be based on mathematical constants. I think I can translate it." "What does it say?" Xyler asked, his own light playing over the intricate carvings on the sarcophagus. Kalen was silent for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "It's a message, a warning, and a history." He looked up, his large eyes wide with a profound, soul-shattering revelation. "They were called the progenitors. They were the first species to achieve interstellar travel in this galaxy. They seeded life on 1,000 worlds. They were our creators. Yours, mine, the Cathar, the Thrax, all of us. We are their children." The weight of his words settled upon them, a silence more profound than that of the empty station. They were standing in the tomb of their own gods. "What happened to them?" Xyler asked, his voice barely a whisper. "They encountered something," Kalen continued, his gaze fixed on the fading glyphs. "Something from outside the galaxy, a force they describe not as a species but as a cosmic principle, a shadow that consumes, a silence that spreads. It didn't destroy them with weapons, it erased them. It consumed their life force, their consciousness, leaving behind only these empty shells, these silent tombs. They fought it. They built this station, this fortress, as a last refuge, but they knew they were doomed. This sarcophagus, it doesn't contain a body. It contains their last message, their legacy, all their scientific knowledge, their history, their art, everything. The beacon was powered by the last vestiges of their life force, a final, desperate attempt to warn their children, to prepare them. As Kalen spoke the last word, the final glyph on the sarcophagus faded, and the chamber was plunged into complete darkness, save for the beams of their suit lights. The beacon was gone. The message had been delivered. For a long time, no one spoke. They stood in the dark in the heart of the tomb of their creators with the terrible knowledge of what lay waiting for them in the void. An ancient, implacable enemy, a consuming silence. Xyler looked at Thorn. He could not see the human's face behind the dark visor, but he could feel the intensity of his stillness. He had been so sure the humans were different, a species apart. But they were just another branch of the same tree, another child of the progenitors. Then Thorn did something that shocked Xyler to his core. He reached up and removed his helmet. In the harsh glare of the suit lights, his face was pale, his expression one of profound, weary sadness. The hard lines seemed softer, The icy blue of his eyes held a depth of emotion Xyler had never seen before. He looked at the dark sarcophagus, and then he looked at the two brothers. "My people have a legend," Thorn said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual hard authority. It was the voice of a man, not an administrator. "Of a lost home, a place called Earth. We don't know if it was our world of origin or a colony. All records were lost in a great cataclysm long ago. We have been adrift for centuries, searching for a history we cannot remember. We have always considered ourselves orphans." The word hung in the air between them. Orphans. He had used their word. He understood. In that moment, the vast gulf between their species, between the harsh human and the two fragile survivors, vanished. They were not master and wards. They were not human and alien. They were all just orphans standing in the tomb of their parents. "They left us more than a warning," Thorn continued, his gaze returning to the sarcophagus. "Kalen, the knowledge, is it accessible?" Kalen, still reeling from the revelation, nodded slowly. "Yes, the sarcophagus is a data storage device of unbelievable capacity. The knowledge is all here. The principles of their technology, it's centuries, millennia ahead of anything in the concordance." Thorn looked at Xyler, and for the first time a faint, sad smile touched his lips. "Your father told you to survive, to be strong. The progenitors have just given us the tools to do so. This station, this is not a tomb, it's an inheritance, it's the means to fight back." The journey back to the resilience was made in a thoughtful silence, the universe outside the megastructure's viewport seeming darker, more menacing than before. The knowledge of the consuming silence, the great enemy that awaited in the void, had recontextualized everything. The petty squabbles of the concordance, the territorial disputes, the political posturing, it all seemed so insignificant now. There was a real dragon in the dark, and all the children were playing with toys, oblivious to the fact that their house was about to be devoured. Back on the ship, the atmosphere had changed irrevocably. The Spartan, sterile environment no longer felt like a prison, but like a sanctuary, a workshop, a crucible. Thorn was no longer just their guardian or their instructor. He was their commander, their mentor, in a war that had not yet officially begun. He downloaded the progenitor's data core from the sarcophagus into the Resilience's mainframe, a process that took days and pushed the ship's systems to their absolute limits. As the data flowed, the ship began to transform. Thorn, with Xyler and Kalen as his eager apprentices, began to integrate the new knowledge. They were no longer just running diagnostics. They were implementing upgrades that would have been considered impossible by concordance standards. The ship's power core was reconfigured, its output increasing 1,000-fold. The sensor arrays were retrofitted with progenitor technology, allowing them to perceive the universe in ways they had never imagined, to see the subtle, cosmic radiation trails left by consuming silence. The hull was reinforced with phase-shifting armor schematics, and new weapons systems, based on controlled singularities, were synthesized in the ship's fabricators. But the most profound changes were not to the ship, but to its crew. Thorn taught them not just science and engineering, but strategy, philosophy, and history. The history of the progenitors, a tragic epic tale of a great civilization's fall. He shared with them the philosophies of his own people, the stoic principles that had allowed humanity to survive its own forgotten cataclysm. He explained that his harshness had not been cruelty, but a calculated effort to prepare them for a reality he had always suspected was far more dangerous than the concordance believed. He was not raising children. He was training soldiers for a war he knew was coming. "Emotion is not a weakness," he explained to them one evening as they sat in the mess hall, the tasteless nutrient paste seeming almost comforting in its familiarity. "But uncontrolled emotion is a vulnerability. It can be exploited by your enemies, and it can cloud your judgment when you need it most. You must feel your grief. You must honor your past. But you must not let it rule you. You must master it. You must forge it into a weapon, the rage you feel for what was lost. Use it to fuel your determination. The sorrow, let it be a reminder of what you are fighting to protect." Xyler and Kalen listened, and they understood. They finally saw the man behind the mask. The harsh administrator was a facade, a carefully constructed persona designed to shield a man who carried the weight of his own species' orphaned past, and who had taken upon himself the burden of preparing the galaxy's next generation for the coming darkness. He was not their captor. He was their shield, and he was their father, not in blood, but in something deeper. In shared purpose, in shared loss, in a shared, desperate hope for the future. Their love for him was not something that was spoken. It was demonstrated in their work, in their trust, in the easy, unspoken rhythm of their life together on the ship. Xyler became a pilot of unparalleled skill, able to make the resilience dance between asteroids as if it were an extension of his own body. Kalen became a master of the progenitor archives, a scientist and strategist who could see the grand, cosmic patterns in the data, predicting the enemy's movements, finding their weaknesses. They became a family, a strange, broken, and ridiculously powerful little family, forged in grief and duty, sailing a ghost ship through a galaxy that was blissfully unaware of its own impending doom. They did not return to the Concordance. To do so would be to invite panic, disbelief, and political infighting. The great powers would try to seize the progenitor technology for themselves, to turn it into a tool for their own petty ambitions. They would not understand the true nature of the threat until it was too late. Thorn knew this. The progenitor's gift was not for the old, dying empires. It was for the future. It was for the orphans. Instead, they began a new mission, a quiet, lonely crusade. Using the advanced sensors of the Resilience, they began to search the galaxy, not for planets to conquer or resources to exploit, but for others. Other orphans. The last survivors of forgotten wars, the scattered remnants of fallen civilizations, the outcasts and the abandoned. They found a colony of avian Xiphons whose world had been rendered uninhabitable by a stellar flare, living in the decaying shells of their generation ships. They found a lone Thrax matriarch, the last of her hive, adrift in a damaged freighter. They found a small community of beings whose homeworld had been absorbed by a territorial, crystalline entity. To each of them, Thorn, with Xyler and Kalen by his side, made the same stark offer he had once made to them. Not a promise of safety or comfort, but a promise of a future, a promise of a purpose, a chance to fight back. He showed them the data from the progenitor tomb. He told them of the consuming silence. He offered them a place in his growing fleet, a fleet of the forgotten and the abandoned, a fleet of orphans. One by one they came. Their fleet grew, not with warships built in massive shipyards, but with salvaged vessels retrofitted with progenitor technology, crewed by those who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. It was a fleet of ghosts, a brotherhood and sisterhood of the last of their kind. And at its heart was the resilience and the unlikely family that had started it all. Years passed. The brothers were no longer children. They were young men, veterans of 100 silent skirmishes in the dark places of the galaxy. They had pushed back the tendrils of the consuming silence where they could, saved worlds that never even knew they were in danger. Xyler stood beside Thorn on the bridge of the Resilience, which was now the flag. Ship of a formidable, if secret, armada. They were looking out at the holographic display, not at a nebula, but at the swirling, majestic arms of their own galaxy. Kalen was at the main sensor station, his face calm and focused. "We can't protect them all forever," Xyler said, his voice a low rumble. "The silence is spreading. It learns, it adapts. We are delaying the inevitable." Thorn nodded, his face etched with the lines of 1,000 sleepless nights. He looked older, but his eyes were still as sharp, as piercing as the day Xyler had first seen him in the Lumina chamber. "We were never meant to fight this war alone," he said. Kalen turned from his console. "Administrator, father," he said, the word now natural, comfortable. "I have found something. In the deepest, most encrypted layers of the progenitor archive, it's not a history, it's not technology, it's a final message, a contingency plan." He brought the data up on the main screen. It was not a language of glyphs or mathematics. It was a star chart, but of a kind they had never seen before. It depicted their galaxy, but from an impossible perspective from the outside. And it showed countless other galaxies, like islands in a vast, dark ocean. A single, pulsing line of light extended from their own galaxy, a pathway through the intergalactic void to a specific point in a distant, neighboring galaxy. "The progenitors knew they might fail," Kalen explained, his voice filled with a renewed sense of wonder. "They knew their children might not be ready. This is their final gambit. It's not a weapon, it's not a fortress, it's a map home." "Home?" Xyler asked, confused. "I thought this galaxy was their home." "No," Thorn said, a slow, dawning realization spreading across his features. He was looking at the star chart with an intensity that bordered on reverence. "The progenitors, they weren't the first. Not really. They were orphans, too." Kalen nodded, bringing up another data file. It was an image reconstructed from fragmented data, an image of a being. It was humanoid, but ancient, impossibly so. Its features were serene, its eyes holding the wisdom of ages. It was not a progenitor. It was something older, something more. "The consuming silence," Kalen said, "is not a natural force. The progenitors believed it was a weapon that destroyed its creators and has been running wild through the universe ever since." a form of cosmic gray goo. The progenitors were not from this galaxy. They were refugees fleeing the silence from their own home galaxy long ago. They came here and they seeded life, hoping to create allies, children who could one day help them stand against the great enemy. This map, it leads to the origin point, to the home of the species that first created and then lost control of the silence. A new silence, one filled not with fear but with a breathtaking, terrifying purpose, filled the bridge. They had been fighting a defensive war trying to save a galaxy. But that was never the true goal. The progenitors' plan was not to save their children. It was to arm them, to train them, and then to send them forth to finish a war that had been raging across the cosmos since the dawn of time. Thorn looked at Xyler, then at Kalen. His two sons, the last survivors of a gentle, artistic race, forged into warriors. He looked at the holographic display of the fleet behind them, a fleet of orphans, of survivors, of ghosts. All of them, products of the progenitors' desperate, galaxy-spanning plan. Our entire existence, Thorn said, his voice low with the emotional gravity of the moment, has been a prelude, a training exercise. The progenitors didn't just leave us an inheritance. They left us a mission, to go to the source, to end the silence forever. He looked out at the star chart, at the impossibly vast, dark void between the galaxies. It was a journey no one had ever attempted, a journey into the heart of the great enemy's territory. It was a suicide mission. It was their destiny. Xyler looked at his brother and at the man who had become their father. He thought of his own father and his last words. Survive, be strong, live for us all. He finally understood what they truly meant. It wasn't just about them. It was about everyone, all the orphans of the galaxy, all the children of the progenitors. He placed his hand on Thorn's shoulder. Well, Xyler said, a grim, determined smile on his face. I suppose we'd better get started. The family has work to do. Thorn returned the smile, a genuine, warm smile full of pride and a profound, bone-deep love. He activated the fleet-wide comms. All ships, his voice boomed, no longer the cold administrator, but the commander of the last best hope for the universe. Set a new course. We're going home. And together, the three of them, the harsh human and his adopted alien sons, turned their fleet of orphans away from the galaxy they had fought to protect, and towards the starless dark, to confront the original sin of the cosmos and to finally, truly, earn their future. The war for survival was over. The war for existence itself had just begun.